Alright, let's get started. So last week, Gavin Verhey published an article on behalf of the Commander format panel. The article was mostly about how the beta for the introduced bracket system was going, and what changes they had decided to make to it. However, at the end of the article, there were two things that stood out, one being about the potential ban list candidates, and the second being about changing how the color identity rule works for the hybrid mana cards. The hybrid mana problem is that, as the rules currently stand in Commander, you cannot, for example, use a Kitchen Finks in your mono green or mono white deck, even though their design intent was to function as either a green or a white card. Their proposed change would only affect how the mana cost is interpreted, so for example cards like Deathrite Shaman would still be a green and a black, because they have a mana symbol in their text box. The hybrid mana topic has always been kind of a controversial topic for Commander, and since I wanted to make videos and talk about Magic in general, I thought I'd give this a try, and here we are. Now, to be fair, it was either this or writing another stern email to WotC about fixes to Magic, but apparently their idea of fixing Magic is adding zeros to their price tag, so oh well. Sorry, I'd say I make bad jokes when I'm nervous, but that might imply that there's a time when I make good jokes, so anyway. In this video I'll be focusing on the hybrid mana issue, as I believe that's the biggest topic here. I'll be using Gavin's article, Mark Rosewater's blog, and some general online discourse as the main arguments as to why the change should be made, and I'll link the article and the blog post in the description if you're interested. I especially suggest reading Gavin's article. It's not too long and it's overall very informative. The only critique I'd honestly have is that the hybrid mana part seemed like kind of a last minute ad, and maybe it was put there to start up the conversation, but I wish it had gone a tad deeper into the topic, as I felt it was like kind of a slap to the face, and it kind of reminded me of my last visit to my car mechanic. Alright, I fixed your engine, your door, your brake light, I'm sleeping with your wife, so we're all good. Cool, thanks man. Wait, what? That was an odd day, not gonna lie to you. Especially since I don't have a wife. But I guess the joke's on him. I don't have a car either. Okay, I promise to try to stay on topic from now on. Seriously, Scouts honor. And you know what that means. That's right, I was never in the Scouts. So anyway, after reading Gavin's article and Mark's blog, I believe the main arguments for why the color identity rule for hybrid cards should be changed can be summarized into three core arguments: design, confusion, and more playable options. But if you believe that I'm missing some important part of the discussion, feel free to just shove it right up there in the comment section. I'll read it, trust me, Scout's honor. Now, the biggest of these three is by far the design argument, so I'll be mostly focusing on that. Honestly, it's like 80% design, and the other two reasons are just tagging along like an unskippable tutorial that no one really asked for. You know, like Sparky. I'll also be giving my thoughts on potential problems that could come if this change is made, and once I've gone through these arguments, I'll also talk about why I believe the change is really being brought up and pushed as a topic at the moment. But for now, let's get this show on the road, starting with the design argument. So, the design argument for why the change should be made, according to Gavin's article, is that in Magic, hybrid cards are made to be playable by either color. That's how they work in all of Magic. If I have a Kitchen Finks, I can put it in my mono white deck or my mono green deck. Commander is a place where it's the opposite. You can't put it in either a mono white or a mono green deck. This is supported by Mark Rosewater's blog post, where he wrote, "First, it's the only element in the Commander format where cards don't function following their design intent. I walked through a series of different cards where how they played in Commander was the opposite of their design intent. Things like companions and hybrid cards that have tried to allow secondary color access to the abilities. This disconnect causes numerous design issues and cuts off some potential design space." So the core of the argument here is that hybrid cards are meant in essence to be the overlap of the colors in them, rather than a fusion of the colors, which at least in theory is represented by gold cards, and therefore shouldn't be viewed in a similar light. And because the color identity is uniquely made up rule, though to be fair all rules are made up, For Commander, they should be allowed to fix it to better match their design intent. Right, so first of all, I disagree with this. Maybe not the actual arguments and statements, they have their own logic behind them, and I do think that the arguments make sense. However, I feel that the essence doesn't feel completely right, and I believe this is because I view it from a different perspective. Gavin and Mark seem to think that all designed cards should work the way they are designed in all formats, and that the consistency should be kept the same across all formats. I, on the other hand, believe that not everything needs to be designed or work in Commander as it was designed or intended for 60-card formats. I also think that you can use the doesn't work as we designed logic to basically change any of the unique rules of Commander. For instance, should we change the deck size from a locked 100 cards to a minimum of 100 cards? That isn't really consistent across all formats either, and it stops designs such as Yorion and Battle of Wits from working as designed. It also limits how cards can be designed, therefore limiting design options. And worst of all, it prevents WotC from selling you 200, make that 300 card precons for triple the price, obviously. It has more cards, therefore you gotta increase the price exponentially. It has that really good cardboard, the best cardboard you've ever tasted. Play to it. I don't need my cards, you don't know that, you can't prove it. I wrote this as a joke, but it's actually kinda shocking how easily I can imagine some Hasbro boss saying all that. To some degree, we can also argue that there are other mechanics that technically don't work similarly in 60-card formats as they do in Commander, like Phyrexian Mana for instance. Because in 60-card formats, you can run cards like Mental Misstep or Phyrexian Metamorph in any color decks without changing your mana space whatsoever, though it does come with the heavy price of 2 life. Is that working as they designed it for 60 cards as opposed to how it works in Commander? Yes, no, maybe, who knows really. My point is that you could make the arguments that they intended Phyrexian cards to work in any color decks for 60-card formats, and now they don't work in Commander, so that too is a flaw that needs to be fixed. Now, yes, these are not one-to-one comparisons, and my examples aren't 100% exact or perfect, but I feel the more you dig, the more inconsistencies in this logic you can find. And I guess I feel a bit weird that Hybrid Mana is given a special spotlight. Maybe because it's Mark Rosewater's favorite design space, maybe some other reason. In any case, there's another part of design that I wanted to talk about, which is the potential color buy breaks. Because as shocking as it might be, not all hybrid cards are designed equal. And yes, Kitchen Finks is the golden boy, the perfect example how this design works in both. You know what, guys, I know I shouldn't, but I'm gonna go on a little rant here, because I used to love Kitchen Finks, one of my favorite uncommons with a cool combo lines, infinite life with Heliod, such a really cool card, really awesome. But nowadays I kinda hate it, because every time the Hybrid Mana conversation raises its ugly head from that ocean we call the internet, the only godforsaken argument is centered around Kitchen Finks. And you can't really even start a reasonable conversation without some random lunatic yelling at you like, "Are you afraid of Kitchen Finks in my mono white deck?" Like, Sorry, had to cut my rant a little short there. Apparently YouTube frowns upon 5-hour videos. Who would have thunk? Now, yes, it's important to point out the best examples. However, I also think it's also very stupid to just ignore the worst examples. And to this point, I went through every hybrid card there is, including the Modern Horizon ones, which was completely unnecessary, because they have the land behind them which dictates their color identity anyway. But that's fine. I actually majored in wasting my time, so this was right up my alley. Anyway, after going through all these cards, I came to the conclusion that most of them are perfectly fine and don't break the color buy. Now, there were exceptions, and ultimately the reason why there were no color buy breaks was because apparently you can bend the color to what I would consider an unreasonable lengths, which I think is a design flaw, but whatever. For instance, let's look at Gyruda, Doom of Depths. It's a legendary creature, Demon Kraken, it's a 6-mana Dimir hybrid card. It has Companion, which is completely irrelevant for this point, but When Gyruda enters, each player mills 4 cards. Put a creature card with an even mana value from among the milled cards onto the battlefield under your control. Now, I would be willing to go to some insanely lengthy arguments that would pretty much make sure that my therapist would need therapy after those, that this card is in no way mono blue. Like, mono blue doesn't do this. To me, blue doesn't bring back creatures from the graveyard. In mono black there are cards like Incarnation Technique and Bridge the Multiverse that do pretty much this, but this doesn't seem blue to me at all, and in my opinion there is nothing that even remotely in mono blue cards that at the moment exist that does something like this, like bring a creature back from the graveyard. However, a friend of mine who's much better at color stuff told me to look Gyruda as more of a stolen goods type of effect rather than a reanimation, because Gyruda has to bring back a creature from among those 4 that were milled with this ability. And I still don't agree with this. But the worst part, I know he's right. I just hate that he is. The other one I looked at was Lures of the Dream Den. In my opinion, mono black doesn't bring back artifacts or enchantments. White does. However, black only interacts with like creatures and sometimes planeswalkers. But apparently, if you bend black's color, it can just interact with anything in graveyards. And I hate that that's how this logic apparently works, because by these absolutely lunatic bends, you can twist any color's small part to fit almost any design. And I really hate these kind of jumps through weird logics to justify design, because it can lead to some kind of problematic designs in my opinion. Like for example, Gruul hybrids can actually land ramp, because red has cards that get lands like Cleansing Wildfire. You know, Izzet card draw in a hybrid form is perfectly reasonable, because red has cards that draw cards like, Browbeat. Like, wow, perfect logic right there. In my opinion, this is just stupid, but yeah, with this logic, when you're supposed to bend it a little, it perfectly makes sense that it now looks like modern art. Like, yeah. But yeah, I suppose with a logic like this, there aren't really many color breaks. But in my defense, everyone I've talked about this did also agree with me that Gyruda and Lurrus could have just as well been made into gold cards, so I guess there's that. However, the most problematic cards that I found were the colorless hybrid cards. Cards like Visage the Queen, Flame Javelin, Tower Above, etc. With the rules changed, these could in theory be in any color deck, because you can choose them to be colorless. And yeah, technically I suppose colorless can have any mechanic or effect it really wants, but come on, man. Flame Javelin is clearly just a red spell, right? And because there are a lot of ways to make mana of any color, like treasures and lands that can be played in any deck that give you access to an abundant supply of colored mana, like like Tomb of Yawgmoth and Yavimaya, and okay, I guess those are it, but they still count. Now, to be fair, outside of Visage the Queen, these cards suck. I have almost no interest in putting any of these cards in my decks, even if I could, but that's not the problem. The problem is what broken new cards could be designed using this logic. Like, for example, hey guys, did you know that all decks want land ramp? Here's a new mythic from our next set. It's called Not a Cultivate, and it has a mana cost of 1 colorless and either a green mana or 2 colorless hybrid. Now all colors have land ramp, for the low cost of this brand new mythic, which is also a Secret Lair exclusive for the low price of $99.95, shipping not included. Okay, so maybe that example is a tad extreme. Or not extreme enough. But my point remains that this is a way to break the color bind in the future, while according to design still being within your color. And my worry is that through this, many of the colors could lose their unique identities. Now, will they do this, or is this just an insane speculation? Who knows, probably not to this extent, but even if Gavin and Mark told me that they wouldn't do this because of the health of the game or whatever, I ultimately believe it doesn't matter. when a Hasbro boss comes in and tells them that they've gotta triple the money, 5 times the profits next year, all promises are thrown out the window. Now I'm sure there are people in the audience that are like, oh, that could never happen, that's too extreme. I remember when Universes Beyonds were just a secret lair thing, and now they are all of standard. Oops, I jumped a bit ahead there. They're more than half of standard. Wait, really? Nah, that can't be... Oh, well, would you look at that? Well... Huh. So, yeah, I think this opens up a pathway to some really unhealthy future designs. But hey, maybe you think that the color pie doesn't matter. And maybe the color restriction thing is kind of stupid as a whole. But, that's a different discussion. But ultimately this argument really depends on how much you trust WotC, not to completely sell out and ruin their game in search of selling more cardboard. Oh boy. Me? Well, as a person who's been their customer for over a decade, I'm pretty convinced that WotC only has their best intentions towards trying to get as much money out of me as possible. But yeah, that's how I view their design. Now for the confusing part, also known as confusion. So, Mark Rosewater wrote in his blog that, and I quote, "It causes confusion among players. Hybrid's core identity is about being playable in a deck of either color, again representing ore in deck construction. From the data we've seen, we believe that a large portion of Commander players actually play it as ore, as they assume it works like it does in every other format. Consistency of message across all formats is super important." Yeah, I'm just gonna disagree with this. First of all, I'm not saying he's lying about his statement, but whenever people bring out the data that I have no access to, no clue what the example size is, where is it from, are the people in the data even, qualified to give an opinion about this, yeah, I'm just not gonna trust that at all. I mean, in theory, I can use the same argument. According to my data, 100% of people thought that the current color identity is easier to understand than the proposed new one. And yes, I do mean all of 100% people who answered, me, myself, and I, thought that. Incredible, isn't it? Mark Rosewater also has a strong bias because he really wants this change to happen. Though to be fair, everyone has a bias, myself included. But my point is that you can't just trust it when someone references random data that you can't access. Secondly, I honestly believe that the current system is way simpler. At the moment, all you have to do is look at what mana symbols are printed on your card, and that's your color identity. Doesn't really get much more simpler than that in my opinion. But let's have a concrete example of this. Here is Flotsam and Jetsam. In the current system, this goes into Sultai decks and any 4-color decks that include Sultai, and of course all 5-color decks. In the new system, it goes into the same as before, but also any blue deck, like Jeskai, Temur, or Mono Blue, and it also goes into Golgari. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible to understand how it works in both cases, but the current system, at least to me, is much more simpler. But hey, feel free to disagree, it's not like I speak for everyone, of course I don't. Lastly, to Mark's argument that a large portion of Commander players actually play it as a ore as they assume it works like it does in every other format, I find this hard to believe. Because in my experience, most Commander players are super casuals, they don't care for tournament magic whatsoever, and they don't really play any other formats. They enjoy the casual aspect of Commander. Now, you can trust me on this because, I have data on it. Just, don't ask me to show it. Okay, that was kind of a low blow, but I have my perspective and, he has his. Hard to say which one is, correct. And, I don't think I am wrong on this, obviously, but I think this is what majority of the casuals think, but there's not really any realistic way to test it. I mean, I guess I could visit every Magic player and ask them personally which is more complicated. But I lost my socks. Oh well, maybe next time. Anyway, feel free to tell me which you think is more confusing. It's not like there's a wrong answer to this. And again, I don't really agree with the whole consistency across formats things, but whatever. Okay, and the last point many people want this change to happen for is because it gives them access to like new builds for old cards, they get to experiment with new builds, and find out new ways to build old commanders. I mean, can't they just do it now anyway? And then, just use Rule 0? Or were the Universes Beyond guys still using it? Who has the rights to use Rule 0 this time? I know it's not me, so it doesn't really matter. And it is this argument that I understand the most. Because, well, it's true. If you change the rules, new builds become available. Like, General Ferocious Roderick gets a whole bunch of new cards to build the deck around with, and, like Sunforger gets a whole list of new targets that it can get from your deck. Granted, when you change any major rules, new builds become available, obviously, but, that's besides the point. I guess if I were to argue why I don't personally buy into this philosophy that much is that I think there are already too many cards printed each year. I consider myself a fairly invested player, and I'm not kidding when I say that I miss like 80% of the new cards printed, and according to our overlord Google, there were like 2,000 unique new cards printed last year, so as far as I'm concerned, I think there are already enough cards to build and brew around, but to be fair, part of those 2,000 were like commons and uncommons that nobody would play in any situation, but again, besides that point. But obviously this is like 100% up to personal opinion. If anybody believes that they need more ways to design and build their decks with, and want the change solely because of that, hey, fair enough. Not much to say about that, so, let's move on. As kind of the last thing I want to talk about that I believe there's an actual reason why this change is being pushed forward, and I don't believe it's, for the health of the game or other BS like that. It's the age-old everyone's best friend. Money. Yes, I know, shocking, and I mean, it makes sense. In a vacuum, if WotC makes a broken Golgari hybrid card, it becomes much more desirable in the changed color system, because before only Golgari, Golgari Plus decks wanted a copy of it, but now any green deck and any black deck also wants a copy. It's simply easier to sell a card with more decks that can play with it, right? And as it just happens, the next in-universe set we're going to, Lorwyn Eclipsed, just happens to be the original plane of hybrid mana design, but I'm sure that's just a coincidence. Just like it was a coincidence that WotC changed how vehicles and artifacts with stats could be your commander right before Edge of Eternities, which just happens to have a bunch of vehicles and stations that, could be used as a commander because of this change. Man, you wouldn't believe this was all a coincidence. Because you shouldn't, and I don't believe it either. Now, to be fair, we've seen an increase in hybrid cards just in general, like in Tarkin Dragonstorm and in the Spider-Man set. Now, if I was a betting man, I'd still wager that we are going to have way more, hybrid cards in Lorwyn set than we had like in the previous ones, but that's speculation and I don't want to spend too much time on what ifs and what could. The only real thing I have to say about the whole thing is that I, like many others, didn't really care about the commander change in Edge of Eternities. It really wasn't that big of a deal. But I didn't know I was signing myself up for, constant rule upgrades and changes whenever WotC decides that they want something to work with their latest designs. Like, seriously, what's next? Are we really going to change the Phyrexian mana in the Phyrexian sequel? The Elspeth Boogaloo, somehow Eleshnorn returned. Ugh. Well, hopefully, regardless of how this hybrid mana thing turns out, WotC just stops changing the rules of Commander every other set, and I think there's one logical conclusion that we can all kind of come to. We gotta ban Kitchen Finks. I swear, at the very least, that when the next time this problem would come up, I wouldn't have to hear how that card is the golden boy, and oh, what are you afraid of it, Kitchen Finks in my mono green? It's fine, calm and collected. You know what, guys, I thought about it a bit and I don't think we should actually ban it. We can't make him a martyr of this cause. Anyway, congratulations, you've listened to me for like 25-ish minutes talking about how we should play with our pieces of cardboard, and I hope you loved every minute of it. In case it wasn't obvious, my opinion is still that we shouldn't change the hybrid rule. That said, before I did any research for this video, I think I was more against it, so I guess there's that. I guess I understand the reasoning now, but I still don't agree with the philosophy behind it. Like, yeah, sure, that sounds like deep, meaningful BS. Let's go with that. But hey, you know, feel free to tell me if you agree or disagree with what I've said or think. I can respect other people's opinions on this, and if you do strongly disagree with me, I'll take the utmost care to read your comment very thoroughly. Whew, nice save. I guess I could edit that out. I'll do it later. Anyway, thank you for sticking with me all the way to the end. I haven't really done a video like this before, so I hope it was at least decent, and since English isn't my first language, I hope I got my point across at least somewhat clearly enough. I'll probably talk about the potential bans in my next video, whenever I actually get around to making it. And hey, consider liking, subscribing, and doing all the good stuff. My data shows that 100% of people who do those things will feel 1000 times better. Anyway, on to the next one.